South Carolina was the hottest team during the second half of last season, and they finished 9-4. They should have went to the college football playoffs, in my opinions. In the second half of last year, they went 3-0 against the top 25. And if they never got fucked over by the refs early during the year in that LSU game, they would have been a sure win to be in the CFP. And I find it a little bit odd that South Carolina is being overlooked again this year. It seems as if the consensus around this team is that last year was a little bit of a fluke with what they're losing on defense. They're going to come back down to earth a little bit. They're probably going to be a 7-8 win team. I strongly disagree with that. Listen, Shane Beamer is one of the most underrated coaches in all of college football. When it comes to having your team ready to play in a big time game against some of the best teams on your schedule, Shane Beamer always has South Carolina ready to play. They're one of the safest bets to make as an underdog. Never count out the Beamer boys. And what also isn't being talked about with South Carolina is they returned two of the best players in the SEC. Ohio State gets credited with having the two best players in college football, Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith, but LaNorris Sellers and Dylan Stewart are probably the third and fourth best players going into this season, right behind those two. We saw LaNorris Sellers single-handedly win South Carolina games against Missouri, Clemson, when he broke 18 tackles in that game, the most broken tackles by any player during the 2024 regular season. And in his last 6 games, he was on an absolute heater. He had 17 total touchdowns and only 3 interceptions. I don't know what the hell got into LaNorris Sellers, where he just became like the second coming of Cam Newton. But then you got Dylan Stewart to go along with that. There's a reason why South Carolina upped up their NIL payments. Because if these two guys would have hit the portal, they immediately would have been the best available in this cycle. And with you bringing those two guys back, you are going to increase your chances of competing for the SEC. Because these are the kinds of players where even if you aren't as good and several spots compared to where you were last year, they will be good enough to elevate your team to the point where they just take over games. We have seen Dylan Stewart single-handedly wreck offenses by himself. We've seen LaNorris Sellers be a one-man wrecking crew. And with the supporting cast that LaNorris Sellers is going to have this year, you return 2 of your top 3 leading receivers from 2024, Mizio Bennett, Nyck Harbor, who, like LaNorris Sellers and Dylan Stewart, is a freak in his own right. Nyck Harbor is still relatively new to the wide receiver position. He was still learning the nuances of what it means to be a good receiver. And going into 2025, I expect him to have a big-time season. He reminds me a lot of DK Metcalf. This dude is just a specimen. If you are creating a player on College Football 25 or College Football 26, it would be fucking Nyck Harbor. The dude has all the traits that you look for in a dominant wide receiver. He just has to continue to improve with his technique and his understanding of the position. But this year, he should somewhat have that figured out a lot more than what he did last year. And he can become one of the best players in college football as well. You have a really good left tackle and Josiah Thomas, who was a freshman All-American last year. You have a good duo of running backs on defense. Of course, you do lose a lot of great talent to the NFL. Your defense was so good last year, it made it impossible for teams to have to focus on just one player. You couldn't just double-team Dylan Stewart. You had to worry about Kyle Kennard. You have multiple guys who could win one-on-one. But just because you lose a lot of talent doesn't mean that you're going to struggle to replace that with how well South Carolina has utilized the transfer portal, with how well they recruit and develop players. Their strength and conditioning program has to be the best in college football. It seemed like every player that was at the combine for South Carolina was just tearing that shit up. They were putting up freakish 40 times, destroying the bench press. The Beamer boys are cooking this year. And sleeping on South Carolina will be one of the biggest mistakes any of you sharp bettors make this year. If you are betting against South Carolina winning 7 games or possibly being a contender for the SEC title, you're making a grave mistake. This is a team that is a lot better than what they look on paper. Shane Beamer is really good at getting his team ready to play in the biggest games of their schedule. And there were a few games last year outside of that LSU game, like that Alabama game, they possibly could have won if LaNorris Sellers played the way in the second half of the season that he could have played in that game. They probably could have won that game too. There's not a single game outside of one on South Carolina's schedule that I don't believe they have a chance of winning. This is a team that's ceiling is probably 11-1, 10-2. The floor has to be 9-3 max. This should definitely be a playoff team, or at least a French playoff team, with you having 2 of the best players in the sport, LaNorris Sellers, Dylan Stewart. You're a well-coached team. You recruit well. You use the transfer portal well. You develop talent well. Your strength and conditioning program is top-notch. South Carolina, I would not be shocked to see this team in an SEC championship game this year. With the way the college football playoffs is set up and with how conference realignment has impacted this sport, it's going to be very rare that you see the same teams that were good in this conference the previous year still be as good the following season. You're going to have a rotation of new teams that always end up being in the mix, and South Carolina is one of those teams that should be vying for a playoff spot this year. They have a much better team than what Ole Miss, Missouri, and Texas A&M do, teams that people tend to be a lot higher on than the Beamer boys coming into 2025. Look out for South Carolina. This is an extremely dangerous team this year.